Well, good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to the Bastow Institute. To our colleagues that are joining us online, lovely to have you here with us today. Beautiful afternoon when we could all be down the local swimming pool having a swim. And if you're watching this in winter, you might want to feel a bit jealous about that thought. Lovely to be with you. While we talk here this afternoon... Oh, we've got some people joining us. And if you're joining us online, there's a few people coming in a bit late. Can you make sure that you've got your microphones muted because it'll come into our theatre here. So looking at talent management this afternoon, a really great topic. Before we start, though, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people on whose land we meet here at Bastow today and acknowledge country for people in other locations around Victoria. So talent management. Talent management, a fascinating thing. Because I think when we've worked in schools, many of us are really good at the way in which we nurture the talent that's there, particularly around leadership. The things that we do, the practices we undertake, the way we identify, we do some really, really good things. But as a system, do we do a very good job of that right across our system? This piece of work that Bastow's been engaged in for about 2.5 years now really has at its core the notion that the only way we're really going to improve outcomes across Victoria is if we begin to build the leadership capability, or sorry, not just build, but we build on the leadership capability that we've built over so many years. Because what do we know? Well, we know that teachers make a difference in a school. It's the teacher that makes a difference, but we also know that the research tells us that it's the quality of the leadership that's going to make a difference. If we want to improve learning outcomes across the school, it's the quality of the leadership. And we know that there's some really extensive research that tells us. And why? Because leaders are particularly well placed to influence what teachers do in classrooms. So it's not rocket science. We know that this work makes a difference. And so if we're going to improve as a system, then we need to be able to improve and help improve right across the state the quality of leadership. So what does the data tell us in Victoria? Well, we know that there is, it's a reasonably stable number of principals that are retiring each year, about 7.1% of the population. It's about 135 people. But we also know that 50% of the principal cohort are over 54 years of age. So one could predict that there will be an increase in those numbers of retirements in the coming years. We also know that there's a low application rate for principal positions, and our understanding is that that's decreasing. The reality is you only need one good applicant to apply and to be able to appoint, but of course it's quite logical that the more people you have applying gives you a greater opportunity or a greater chance that that one good applicant's going to be in those pool of people. What else do we know? Well, we know that through the autonomy that began in the late 1990s for schools or in the education system, that the system has taken a bit of a back seat on matters to do with human resource management and those and the way in which schools are led and managed. So we've moved away from a system notion of responsibility for these things, and this piece of work that we've done here allows us to provide the system with a range of tools and resources that schools can use so that we do, right across the state, as I've said before, right across the system, we have an opportunity to build that capability. And also we know that principals tell us that they love their job, but they wouldn't encourage other people to do it. So we need to change that narrative around leadership, particularly principalship, and we need to be looking at how we build the pipeline from emerging through to middle leaders, through to assistant principal, aspirant principal, and to, once principals are in that spot, into their system leadership role in various ways. So that's what the data tells us. But anecdotally, we know how incredibly important it is that there is really good leadership in schools, not just for the student learning outcomes, but for the way in which the members of our school community get to engage with each other, interact, the health and well-being, the social development, and just making work a good place to be. So Bastow, about 2.5 years ago, started doing a little bit of work in terms of this. We talked to a number of schools, worked with a whole range of schools, looking at some of the great practice that was in schools and identifying some of the issues that actually existed. And it's no surprise that we'd find that practices are fairly ad hoc within schools and between schools. No systematic approach, really, in the system to identifying and nurturing and developing talent. And so the talent management framework is an opportunity for us to provide the system and schools with, as I said before, a range of tools and supports that can help people build talent. So I'm going to hand over to the two chief architects of this piece of work. Jerry Wild, who's the Manager of Marketing and Stakeholder Engagement at Bastow, who's been leading the work, and working with Tessa Daring from the NOUS group, organisational psychologist and one of the directors at NOUS, who've been working on this with schools and others, and they're going to talk to you about what they've developed, how it works, and what's available to support you. So thanks, Tessa. Thanks, Jerry. I'll hand over to you.
Right.
Great.
Thanks, Neil, for that introduction. I'll take that from you so I can control the slides. Thanks, everyone, for coming tonight to join us both online and also in our audience today. We've had a lot of interest in this talent management framework. We've been going around the state for, just as Neil said, over 2 years, consulting with people about what the framework should look like and how we can make sure that this process is simple enough to use that people want to pick it up and integrate it into the work that they're already doing in schools, such as their AIPs and their PDPs. So we've really looked at designing a tool that integrates with the current processes so that it's not an additional thing that we're asking people to do, but it builds on already good practice around development, and it also builds on practice that schools are doing around developing their talent in their schools. So over the next half an hour, Tessa and myself are going to walk through the tool and explain how it works, and then call for questions if people have those, and then talk about how you can get involved next year with the rollout. So the tool itself looks at 3 elements, and they're done in conjunction. So that's identify, develop, and support. So I think when with our conversations, we've identified across the state pockets of where people are doing each of these elements in different ways to different degrees of success. But this tool actually can't stand without the other. So you need to have a process that does identify, develop and support people along the way, and that's the success of this model. So what we want to do is to be able to support schools in being able to do this in a systematic way and a standard way and a transparent way, and that's the power of this tool, because it allows you to have a process that frames up your approach as to how you're identifying and developing your talent in your school. So some of the feedback that we've had from skeptics saying, well, I think I do this pretty well in my school, to the end of the process when they've used it, they've said, well, some of these tools that you've given us has enabled us to really sharpen up the way that we approach how we identify and develop our leaders. So we're going to share those approaches with you tonight. So the other interesting point about this talent management framework is that we're not just looking at senior leaders, we're actually looking at a pipeline of leadership. So this tool helps you identify talent in your classroom. So who's doing well in the classroom, and who do you think should be looking at leading small projects in your team or leading small teams of people to develop tools? Who's in the middle leadership group who's doing really well in that space. They're leading teams, but there might be opportunities for them to step up and take on more senior responsibilities in your school. And it's even looking to who in your school might be able to work at a system level as well too. So who of our principals should be stepping up into our new network roles and or SEAL roles. So it's a whole continuous process of looking at developing young talent through to our experienced leaders in our system. So we identified 4 key steps within this leadership journey, and it looks linear, but it's not. We know that people might step off at any time to do different and specialise in different areas, but this is looking at our leadership journey, and we've identified these based on the AITSL standards, and through consultation looked at what areas do we think that needed to be expanded around what leadership steps need to be taken at each of those areas. So our development and our support tools all look at these different areas of steps that you'll take through your journey. So the other thing that this talent management framework tool does is it actually looks at how we can get a more diverse leadership pool. I'm not sure if you're aware, but a lot of us have unconscious bias about who we choose, and that's because we like working with people similar to ourselves. So these tools actually look at helping you ask questions around how and why, who you're selecting, and moderating that with other people. So this is a tool that you use with your leadership team to discuss who you're selecting as those that have high potential, and looking to others to see what they've seen around these people and the potential that they might have. So the feedback that we have had is not just that people are looking at more part-time women, but they're looking at people who are younger people. So it's not dependent on age or gender or cultural background. These questions help you broaden out your perspective on who might be chosen to be your high potential leaders. So I am now going to hand over to Tessa, who's going to talk through the tools that we have used with schools, and these are the tools that, if you give us the opportunity, we can come and work with you in rolling out in your school. Thanks.
Thanks, Jerry. And hello, everyone. So I want to talk through in more detail the 3 steps that Jerry's just introduced. So identify, develop, and support. So I'm going to start with identify, which of course, as you would understand, is one of the most important steps in the process. And as Neil and Jerry both mentioned, when we went out and talked to school leaders, it was very apparent that the current approaches to identification are really ad hoc, unstructured, and really vary by school. So there are absolutely some pockets out there of schools doing great things in this space, and we were able to talk to them, which was great. And there are some other schools that are very new to talent management and need more support. So we've designed a tool that works on both ends of that continuum. So it helps people that are more advanced in talent management just to help them apply some more structure and objectivity to the process. And it also supports those that are brand new to the process. It gives them enough tools that they can run this successfully in their schools, generally on their own. So when we think about identification, when we talked about leaders over the last 2 years, many talk about their leadership journey. And what's really clear is many, and you probably, those on the call and in the room here will think about an instance where they were tapped on the shoulder. And we heard this time and time again, and then what we were thinking about when we look at identification, it's why, as a school leader or when you were an individual, why are you tapping someone on the shoulder, or why were you tapped on the shoulder? And we asked this question to really understand what were the right identification questions and criteria to be included into the approach. So you'll see there in front of you that we've landed on 3 key criteria. This is based on what we've heard about high performance in schools and what the research is saying around talent management. So there are three criteria here. The first is performance. And what we know is performance is a great predictor, well, it's a great indicator of someone that's really good at their job. So we absolutely want people to be high performing in their current roles. But we can't just rely on performance, and often it's the easiest thing to rely on. So we need to couple that with potential, which is the second criteria. And what potential does, it basically we look at the qualities or characteristics in an individual that increases the likelihood that they're going to be successful at the next level. So if we think about the leadership steps that you've just seen, what we're looking for are attributes in someone that means that, yes, they're a great emerging leader, but they're showing the qualities that means they could be a great principal in the future. The third, and absolutely just as important criteria, is readiness. So it's great if we've got someone that's a high performer, someone that's got high potential, but we want to make sure that the person is ready, at least, if not now, or at least in the near future, because we want people that are interested in stepping into leadership and have the time and the commitment to take, to basically be involved in more in-depth development. So what we've done, and you'll see on the right, are key questions. So when we spoke to school leaders, we asked, well, what would be most helpful to use to identify people in the school? And really where we landed was something very simple. So we've called this the identification questionnaire. And what it does is we've devised some questions that sit along each of the criteria, and these are just some examples here that are in the questionnaire. So for performance, we've got who are the best performing individuals, potential, who stands out as a leader, and one of the other great potential questions that we've included is who do others go to for advice on teaching and learning in the school? And we found that question particularly gets to the heart of what potential is looking for. And the final one is around readiness and really asking people if they've got capacity and interest to be involved. And what we found in pilots is helpfully, even though the approach is simple, we are getting a very diverse mix of people. So we're identifying people that are even part-time, and that's people that in the pilot, for instance, they hadn't thought of those individuals before. And as well as we're looking regardless of age and experience, which is a great thing, and we really want to encourage an inclusive process here. So the looking at that in a bit more detail, we've just provided a few of the qualities and some more information around what are some of the things we're looking for in terms of performance and potential. One thing that we do want to emphasise is that the identification questionnaire, it's really simple and it's been designed to be used in conjunction with the leadership steps. So the leadership steps helps to articulate what are the capabilities and behaviours that we're expecting at each of the different levels of leadership. And the identification questionnaire is deliberately simple. So you can see here are just some examples of the qualities, and as you can imagine, the expectations will differ by level. But when we talk to school leaders, there were a series of performance indicators or behaviours that were quite consistent across each of the different leadership steps. As you can imagine, being outcome focused will look different depending on whether you're an emerging leader or a school leader, but there was definitely there was some consistency in what we were seeing there. So we've pulled out those consistent qualities that actually stand true across all of the leadership steps, and have put them into the identification questionnaire. A lot of the things up there wouldn't surprise you, and if we look at potential qualities, things like emotional intelligence, teaching excellence, having credibility, having presence, are all really important things that what we found is when people were tapping them on the shoulder, these are the things that they were looking for. And what the criteria do and these additional supports help us to differentiate those who have the potential to be high-performing school leaders. So the second part of the process is development. So once we've gone through our identification questionnaire, we've identified a series of individuals, it's really important then to think about what are their strengths and what are their development areas. And once we're clear on that, it's really important to set up individualised development. So we know the path for one person will be different to the other, and this approach really supports that. So on the slide, we've provided a few different examples around development. So one of the things that sits underneath all of this is the 70-20-10 principle of learning, and this is particularly important in a school setting, as you all know, because we know it's not viable to take people out of the school. So in the 70-20-10 principle, 70% of the learning should be occurring on the job, 20% learning from others, and 10% formal learning. And we know that some of the BASTO programs in particular actually help touch on all of those elements, but it's important to think about how can we build the opportunities in the school for people to step into. And from pilots, we heard that people didn't really know where to start in terms of development. So what we've developed is a tool that will help them look at what their high potential's development areas are and actually match them with the right development. And one example from the pilots was there was a leading teacher that was demonstrating high potential, and because they did the process just before their planning cycle, they were able to create a role for that person in the next year, so she could have a stretch opportunity and step into that role. And that's just one great example of some of the ways that people have used this. The final step is support. So we're often really good at identifying people and then shaping their development. And we send them off with a development plan, and we don't always check in regularly about how they're going. So when we went out and talked to school leaders, this was one of the most important yet simple steps in the process, because it's one that we often miss. So you'll see here a network. So we recognise that to help people be successful through this process and through their leadership journey, there are both formal and informal supports available. One of the formal supports that I'd really like to call out here is something that's quite unique to this process, and it's called a lead mentor. So once someone's identified as high potential, they're matched with a lead mentor. Now, in some cases, that might be their one upline manager or the person that helps them through their PDP process. But for some, you might draw on others outside of the school. So, for instance, what we found in pilots is we put two small schools together, and they both identified high potential leaders, and then basically match lead mentors across the school. So a high potential in one school had a lead mentor in another small school, and that just meant that they could have more diversity in their experience. In a larger school, it's really based on what the person's development goals are, and sometimes the formal report relationship might not be the best one for development. So we've provided some guidance around how do you even select the right lead mentor. And the idea isn't to be onerous, but really to have some structure there to help support the individual through their journey. And what we see is this could also be a development opportunity for someone. So someone that's been identified as a team leader could be supporting those that have been identified as an emerging leader. The other really helpful thing of the support process is it provides high potentials an opportunity to step back and reflect on the strength of their support network, so they can identify their strengths and their gaps. I'm going to hand over to Jerry, who's going to talk about how you can get involved in implementing the TMF.
Thanks, Tessa. So I'm wondering how you see this TMF process assisting you and adding value to your leadership team in your school or in your network or more broadly in your region. We've found that through the pilot program that it's good to pair up with other schools in your network so that you can exchange ideas and also offer opportunities to make opportunities for development happen beyond your school as well. So if you're interested in this process, it's about contacting Basto, and I'll put up their email address at the end of this presentation that you can email. We'll then organise a coach to come out and work with you and your peers in your network. And the tools that we'll walk you through even set up communication protocols, give you templates to use in your leadership meetings, and the coach who's going to provide you support will work that through with you in a first meeting that will take about an hour and a half, and then there'll be a follow-up call to see how you're going, and then they'll work through the next stages, which is the first stage is identify, and the next two stages are develop and support. So overall, the process will take about 8 weeks, but it will be integrated into your leadership meetings, and the time that it will take overall, depending on how many high potential people you'll select, should take up to 8 to 10 hours. But this will be integrated into your PDP process or other processes in your school that you'd like to integrate this with. It's been interesting that through the pilot project, some schools have wanted to do it early in the year, others have wanted to do it later on in the year. So this can be done at any time that suits you. And once you've gone through the process once, then it's very easy to use. And these tools are all available on Basto 307, so you can download those at any time that you want. So that's a wrap up of the process, as I mentioned, over 8 weeks. That's the time that we allocate to give you support and keep some momentum in the process. And if you're interested in signing up, we'd like you to email the address that you can see on the screen behind me, or I'm not sure where you're seeing it, online, or give us a call. And I'm wondering if you have any questions in the audience or online. Just a couple of minutes to talk to the person next to you, and if you have some questions, we can answer those now. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to talk amongst yourselves. I'll go back to that slide. All right. No one in the audience here? We can talk later after we've finished this presentation. And anyone online? No? All right. Well, we're going to let you out early. That went fairly quickly. But we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks very much.